Why does it feel like God is blessing others financially but not you? You pray, you try to stay disciplined, you try to do the right thing. You try to be responsible with what you have. And yet your financial situation does not seem to increase. You see people around you moving forward, growing, expanding, living with less pressure. And you start asking yourself a question that you don't always say out loud, but you feel it deeply. God, why not me? Because it is confusing. And if you are honest, it is also frustrating. Because you are not ignoring your responsibilities. You are not someone who avoids effort. You are not careless with your life, you are trying. And still the results you expect are not showing up. And over time this creates something dangerous. Not just financial pressure, but internal doubt. Because you begin to feel like something is not connecting. Like there is a gap between what you are doing and what you are receiving. And that gap is where most people begin to lose clarity. Because they assume that the solution is simply to do more, to try harder, to push further. So they increase their effort, they sacrifice more time. They add more pressure to themselves, thinking that eventually something has to change. But what if the problem is not that you are not doing enough? What if the problem is that what you are doing is not aligned with what actually produces increase? Because there is something important that most people never understand. And that is that increase is not random. It is not based only on effort. And it is not just a result of asking for more. Increase follows alignment, and if there is misalignment, even if you are trying, even if you are working, even if you are praying, you can stay in the same level for years. Not because God is ignoring you, but because something is not ready yet. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because once you understand this, you stop asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, why am I not receiving more? You start asking, what is preventing increase? Because the issue is not always about receiving. Sometimes it is about what is blocking, and this is the part that most people avoid. Because it requires honesty, it requires self-observation. It requires recognizing patterns that you may not want to admit. Because it is easier to believe that the problem is external. It is easier to think that something outside of you needs to change. But real transformation begins when you understand that the blockage is often internal. It is in the way you think. It is in the way you react. It is in the habits you repeat without noticing. And this is what keeps people stuck. They focus on what they want, but they do not examine what is stopping them. They focus on growth, but they ignore misalignment. They focus on results, but they never analyze their patterns. And as a result, they remain in the same cycle, trying harder, waiting longer, hoping something changes, but nothing really shifts. And the truth is that God is not limited in what He can give. But there are principles that determine what you can sustain. Because increase without preparation creates pressure, and pressure without structure leads to loss. And that is something most people do not see until it is too late. Because sometimes what feels like a delay is actually protection. Sometimes what feels like stagnation is actually preparation. Sometimes what feels like nothing is happening is actually a process that is shaping you to be able to handle what you are asking for. So instead of thinking that more is always better, you need to understand that increase only comes when you are ready to handle it. And readiness is not just about desire. It is about alignment. It is about discipline. It is about the way you think, the way you act, and the way you manage what you already have. Because if you cannot manage what is in your hands now, more will not fix the problem. It will only amplify it. And this is where many people fail without realizing it. They ask for more while mishandling what they already have. They desire increase while maintaining habits that block it. They pray for growth while staying in patterns that limit them. And this creates a contradiction. Because you cannot move forward while repeating the same patterns that keep you in place. You cannot experience increase while holding on to habits that resist it. And this is why this message matters. Because once you shift your perspective, you begin to see things differently. You begin to notice patterns you ignored before. You begin to question habits you thought were normal. You begin to recognize that maybe the issue is not outside. Maybe it is inside, and this is where real transformation begins. Not when your situation changes, but when your understanding changes. Because once you understand what is actually blocking increase, you can begin to remove it. And when that happens, everything starts to move differently. Asterisk, now let's go deeper. Because this is where one of the biggest misunderstandings begins to break. And if you truly understand this part, it will completely change the way you see your situation. Many people believe that if they are not experiencing financial increase, it must be because God is not allowing it, or because the timing is not right, or because they simply need to wait longer, and while timing can play a role, that explanation is often used to avoid something much more uncomfortable, something much more personal. Because it is easier to say that God has not decided yet than to ask yourself if there is something in your life that is not aligned. It is easier to wait than to evaluate. It is easier to hope than to confront patterns. But the truth is that God is not randomly deciding who increases and who stays stuck. There are principles that operate consistently whether people recognize them or not. And those principles respond to alignment, not just intention. This means that it is possible to want change, to pray for change, to even believe in change, and still remain in the same place, not because God is ignoring you, but because your actions are not aligned with what actually produces growth. And this is where things become real, because now the focus is no longer on waiting. It is on understanding instead of asking when will things change. You begin to ask what needs to change, and that shift alone already puts you in a completely different position. Because now you are no longer passive, you are intentional. Now here is something important to understand. God does not increase chaos, He does not multiply disorder, and He does not expand what is unstable, because increase amplifies everything. Not just the good. If there is no structure, more becomes overwhelming. If there is no discipline, more becomes loss. And if there is no clarity, more becomes confusion. And this is why alignment matters more than desire. Because desire alone does not create capacity. And capacity is what determines how much you can actually handle. Now think about this carefully. If someone is already struggling to manage what they have, what would happen if that amount suddenly doubled? Would their situation truly improve? Or would the same pattern simply operate at a larger scale? And this is where many people misunderstand increase. They think that more money will solve their problems. But in reality, more money often reveals their problems. Because it exposes habits, it exposes mindset, and it exposes patterns that were already there. And this is why increase is not just given. It is matched to readiness, not in a limiting way, but in a sustainable way. Because what you cannot sustain, you cannot keep. And what you cannot manage, you will eventually lose. So instead of focusing only on receiving more, you need to begin focusing on becoming someone who can sustain more. And this is where the shift begins. Because now the goal is not just increase, the goal is alignment. Now here is another layer that many people ignore, and that is consistency. Because alignment is not something you do once, it is something you maintain over time. It shows in your daily decisions. It shows in how you handle pressure. It shows in whether you follow through or stop halfway. And this is where many people fall short. They start strong. They feel motivated. They try to change, but they do not maintain it. And without consistency, there is no growth. Because growth is not built on occasional effort. It is built on repeated alignment. Now here is something even deeper. Many people say they trust God, but their actions reflect uncertainty. They hesitate when opportunities appear. They delay decisions that require growth. They stay in what feels safe, even when it keeps them stuck. And this creates a contradiction. Because you cannot move forward while holding onto the same level of thinking that kept you where you are. Growth requires movement, and movement requires change. And change requires letting go of what is familiar. And this is where many people resist, not because they do not want better, but because better requires different, and different feels uncomfortable. But this is exactly where increase begins, not when everything feels easy, but when you start acting differently despite the discomfort. And this is why understanding this changes everything. Because now you stop seeing your situation as something random, and you begin to see it as something that can be transformed. Not overnight and not instantly, but intentionally. Because once you align your actions with the principles that produce growth, increase is no longer something you chase, it becomes something that follows. Now let's make this practical, because up to this point you may understand the idea. But the real question is, how does this actually show up in your life? What are the specific patterns that are blocking increase without you even noticing it? And this is where things become very real, because most of the time, it is not one big mistake. It is a series of small repeated decisions that slowly shape your financial reality. One of the most common patterns is spending without intention. Not extreme or reckless spending, but unconscious spending. Money comes in and it goes out without a clear purpose, without a plan, without direction. You pay what is urgent, you cover what is necessary, and whatever remains gets used without thinking about the long term. And at the end of the month you look back and wonder where everything went. And this repeats again and again, not because you are irresponsible, but because you were never taught to give your money a clear assignment before it leaves your hands. And over time this creates something that is invisible but powerful. You are working for money, but your money is not working for you. Everything you earn is being consumed, not directed, not multiplied, just used. And no matter how much you increase your income, the result does not change, because without structure, more money only becomes more spending. Another pattern that blocks increase is avoiding discomfort. Many people stay in the same financial position not because they lack opportunities, but because they avoid the actions that feel uncertain. They avoid learning new skills, they avoid stepping into new environments. They avoid taking calculated risks, because deep down they are more comfortable with what is familiar, even if it keeps them stuck. And this creates a limit that is not visible but very real. Because growth always requires doing something that feels uncomfortable at first. Now here is another pattern that is even more subtle, reacting instead of planning. Living in reaction mode means you are always responding to what happens instead of preparing for what is coming. An expense appears and you react. A problem shows up and you react. A decision comes and you make it in the moment without clarity, without structure, without thinking long term. And this keeps you in survival mode. Because when you do not plan, life decides for you. And when life decides for you, you are always one step behind. There is also a pattern that many people never recognize, undervaluing what they already have. Your skills, your knowledge, your potential. Many people remain financially stuck because they do not recognize their own value. They settle for less. They accept opportunities that do not reflect their potential. They do not negotiate. They do not position themselves for growth. Not because they cannot, but because they do not see themselves at a higher level. And what you believe about your value directly affects what you allow in your life. Another important pattern is lack of consistency. Many people start well, they feel motivated. They try to change, they create a plan, but they do not sustain it. They stop after a few days. They lose focus. They go back to old habits. And this creates a cycle of starting and stopping that never produces real results. Because growth is not built on intensity, it is built on consistency. And without consistency, nothing compounds. Nothing builds, nothing lasts. Now here is one that connects deeply with everything we have talked about. Misalignment between belief and action. Many people say they want growth. They say they want increase. They say they believe in change, but their actions do not reflect that. They continue making the same decisions. They continue repeating the same habits. They continue operating in the same mindset, and this creates a disconnect because you cannot expect different results while maintaining the same behavior. And finally, there is one pattern that ties everything together: lack of direction. Most people are not moving toward a clear financial vision. They are simply reacting to life as it happens. They work, they earn, they spend, and they repeat. But there is no structure, no defined goal, no intentional path guiding their decisions. And without direction, effort becomes scattered. You try many things, but nothing builds. You stay busy, but you do not grow, and over time this becomes exhausting. And this is where frustration begins, because you feel like you are doing everything, but nothing is changing. And the truth is that these patterns are not permanent. They are learned, and anything that is learned can be changed. But it starts with awareness, because you cannot change what you do not see. And now that you see it, now that you recognize these patterns, you are no longer operating blindly, you are becoming intentional. And that is where everything begins to shift. Because change does not happen when you try harder. Change happens when you start doing things differently. And that is exactly what we are about to move into next. Now that you can see the patterns more clearly, we need to go deeper, because behind every visible habit, there is something invisible driving it. Something that is not always obvious, but it is always present, and that is your internal alignment. Your mindset, your identity, the way you see yourself, and the way you interpret what is possible for your life. Because the truth is that most financial limitations do not begin with money. They begin with perception, with what you believe you can handle, with what you believe you deserve, with what you believe is available to you. And these beliefs shape your decisions in ways that you may not even notice. If deep down you believe that money is difficult to maintain, you will unconsciously create situations where it leaves quickly. If you believe that opportunities are rare, you will hesitate when they appear. If you believe that you are not ready for more, you will avoid the actions that would take you to the next level. And all of this happens without you realizing it, because these beliefs operate quietly in the background. And this is why two people can have the same opportunities, but completely different results. Because they are not operating from the same internal alignment. One moves forward, the other hesitates. One takes action. The other delays, one builds, the other repeats. And over time that difference becomes visible in their results. Now here is where this connects spiritually. Because alignment is not only practical, it is also internal. It is about becoming someone who is prepared, someone who is disciplined, someone who can handle growth without losing control. Because increase is not just about receiving more. It is about managing more, and if there is instability inside, more will not fix it, it will expose it. And this is why many people feel like they are stuck, not because nothing is happening, but because the process is internal before it becomes external. The change begins in how you think, in how you decide, in how you respond, long before it appears in your financial situation. Because what you consistently think becomes what you consistently do. And what you consistently do becomes what you eventually experience. And if that pattern does not change, the result will not change either. Now think about this. If someone continues thinking the same way, making the same decisions, reacting the same way under pressure, and handling money the same way, what reason is there for their results to be different? And this is why this is not about waiting, it is about transforming. It is about becoming different so that your results can become different. Because growth is not given to who wants it. It is sustained by who is ready for it, and readiness is built. It is developed, it is practiced daily, it is reflected in small decisions, in discipline, in consistency, in awareness. And this is what most people overlook. They want the result without going through the process that makes the result sustainable. But once you understand this, everything changes. Because now you stop looking outside for answers, and you start looking inside for alignment. You begin to question your patterns. You begin to adjust your habits. You begin to take responsibility for your direction. And that is where real growth begins, because once your internal alignment changes, your external results have no choice but to follow. Video 6, Bloke 5, Pro 5K plus transition to CR. Now the question becomes, what do you do with this? Because understanding is powerful, but without action, it changes nothing. And this is where you separate yourself from the cycle that keeps most people stuck. The first thing you need to do is bring awareness to your patterns, not in a superficial way, but honestly. Observe how you handle money. Observe how you make decisions. Observe how you react under pressure. Observe where you delay, where you avoid, where you repeat the same habits, because awareness is the beginning of change. And without it, you will continue operating on autopilot. The second thing is to create structure, because without structure, there is no direction. And without direction, there is no growth. Give your money purpose before it leaves your hands. Define where it goes. Define what it builds. Define what it protects. Because money without direction disappears. But money with structure creates stability. The third thing is consistency. Not intensity, not motivation, but consistency. Small actions repeated over time create results that feel impossible at the beginning, but inevitable at the end. And this is where most people fail. Not because they cannot do it, but because they do not sustain it long enough to see the result. The fourth thing is to become comfortable with discomfort, because growth will always require it. There will be moments where you feel uncertain, where you feel challenged, where you feel outside of your normal environment. Instead of avoiding it, you need to recognize it as a sign that you are moving forward. And finally, you need to align your actions with what you say you want, because you cannot expect increase while maintaining the same patterns that keep you where you are. Your actions must reflect your intention. Your habits must support your growth. And your decisions must move you in the direction you want to go. And this is where everything comes together. Because now it is no longer about asking why things are not changing. Now it is about becoming the reason they change. Because once you shift from waiting to aligning, from hoping to acting, from repeating to transforming, everything begins to move differently. And this is the part that most people never reach. Because it requires responsibility, it requires honesty, it requires change. But if you are still here, if you are listening to this, it means you are already moving in a different direction, because awareness leads to action, and action leads to change, and change leads to results. And those results will reflect not just what you want, but who you have become. And this is what ultimately determines increase. Not luck, not randomness, not external circumstances, but alignment. Asterisk at this point, you are no longer in the same place where you started this video. Because now you see something that many people never stop to see. You understand that the issue is not just about money, it is not just about effort, and it is not just about waiting, it is about alignment. And once you truly see that, you cannot unsee it. Because now when you look at your situation, you no longer feel completely confused. You begin to understand that there are patterns, that there are decisions, that there are habits shaping your reality every single day. And that means something powerful. It means that change is possible. Not because something external suddenly shifts, but because you begin to shift. And that is where everything starts. Because the moment you take responsibility for your alignment, you take back control of your direction, you stop feeling stuck. You stop feeling like you are waiting for something to happen. And you begin to move with intention. And this is where the difference becomes visible. Because most people will hear something like this and move on. They will agree, they will feel motivated for a moment. And then they will go back to the same patterns, the same habits, the same decisions, and nothing will change. But a small percentage of people will do something different. They will take this seriously. They will observe their patterns. They will begin to adjust their actions. They will choose consistency over comfort. And over time, their results will reflect that difference. And the truth is that you are always becoming someone through your daily actions. Whether you are aware of it or not, every decision is shaping your direction. Every habit is reinforcing a pattern. Every reaction is strengthening a way of thinking. And over time, that becomes your reality. So the question is not just what do you want financially? The real question is who are you becoming in the process? Because that is what determines everything. Because once you become aligned, increase is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that follows you. It becomes something that naturally connects to the way you think, the way you act, and the way you manage what is in your hands. And this is why this matters, because you are not just changing your situation. You are changing your trajectory. You are changing what is possible for your future. And once that shift happens, there is no going back. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. As you listen to this, what did you recognize? Which pattern did you see in your own life? Was it the lack of structure? Was it inconsistency? Was it avoiding discomfort? Or was it something deeper that you had not admitted before? Because the moment you recognize it, you already took the first step. And that step is more important than most people realize. So I want you to do something simple, but powerful. Go to the comments and write this: I'm ready to align. Not for me, but for you. Because when you write it, you make it real. You make a decision. You stop being passive and you become intentional. And I will read your comment. Because I want to see who is actually serious about changing, who is actually ready to move differently, and who is tired of repeating the same cycle. And if this message connected with you, if it made you think differently, if it made you see something you had not seen before, then stay close to this channel. Because this is not about motivation, this is about transformation. This is about understanding principles that actually change the way you live and the way you grow. And remember this: your current situation is not permanent, but your current patterns will keep it that way if you do not change them. So do not wait for things to improve. Become the reason they improve, because once you align, everything begins to move differently.